The massive council chamber stretched before Jake Morrison like a cathedral of alien arrogance. He sat in the human section, watching the assembled representatives of 12 species debate the future of galactic defense. The Zeltharians towered over everyone else with their crystalline bodies catching the artificial light. The Valdari collective huddled together in their environmental suits, whispering among themselves. The ancient keepers floated in their energy fields, their thoughts almost visible in the air around them. Jake had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 8 years. He had seen these same aliens make the same mistakes over and over again. They talked about wisdom and experience, but they never listened to the species that actually fought their wars. Today's debate was about the recent Void War, 3 months ago. An unknown enemy had attacked the Outer Rim worlds. The Council had panicked and sent their combined fleets to investigate. Those fleets had been destroyed in the first engagement. It was human ships that had saved the day. Human tactics that had turned the tide. Human soldiers that had died on alien worlds to protect species that barely acknowledged their existence. But now the Council was discussing what went wrong, and somehow it was all humanity's fault. Councillor Vexthal of the Zeltharians stood at the center podium. His voice rang out like breaking glass across the chamber. The humans acted without proper authorization during the Void War crisis. Their aggressive tactics, while effective, show a dangerous disregard for established protocols. Jake felt his jaw tighten. Captain Lisa Harper, sitting beside him as the military liaison, placed a warning hand on his arm. She knew what he was thinking. They all knew what really happened during the Void War. The enemy had come from dark space with weapons that tore through energy shields like paper. The Council fleets had tried to engage using their traditional formations and tactics. Thousands of ships had been lost in the first hour. The aliens had retreated in panic, leaving entire star systems defenseless. Human Admiral Ryan Carter had taken command of the surviving forces without waiting for Council approval. He had adapted human military doctrine to the new threat. Instead of large formations, he had used small strike groups. Instead of direct engagement, he had used hit-and-run tactics. Instead of energy weapons, he had used kinetic rounds that the enemy couldn't deflect. It had worked. The human fleet had destroyed the invaders and saved 3 star systems from total extinction. But the Council wasn't grateful. They were angry that humans had taken charge without permission. Councillor Yathara of the Valdari Collective spoke. Next, her voice came through her translator with electronic distortion. The humans continue to show why they are unsuited for leadership roles. They act on instinct rather than wisdom. They choose violence over negotiation. They lack the patience that comes with true civilization. Jake had heard this speech before. Every species in the Council was older than humanity. The Zeltharians had been spacefaring for 50,000 years. The Valdari had built their first interstellar empire when Earth was still covered in ice. The Keepers claimed to have existed since the galaxy was young. They all looked at humans as children. Dangerous children who were useful in a fight but couldn't be trusted with important decisions. The fact that human childish tactics had just saved their civilizations didn't seem to matter. Dr. Helen Brooks, the human representative on the Science Council, sent Jake a private message through her communicator. They're about to vote on the defense restructuring proposal. Our sources say it's going to pass. Jake already knew what was in that proposal. All human commanders would be demoted to advisory roles. Human ships would be integrated into alien fleets under alien command. Human military doctrine would be reviewed and modified by Council experts. It was a complete rejection of everything humans had contributed to galactic defense. The vote was called. One by one, the alien representatives cast their decisions. The Zeltharians voted yes. The Valdari voted yes. The Nexus Confederacy voted yes. Every single non-human species voted to strip humans of command, authority in the galactic fleet. When the results were announced, Councillor Vexthal actually seemed pleased. This restructuring will ensure that military operations are conducted with proper oversight and wisdom. The human representatives may now return to their advisory capacity. Advisory capacity. Jake almost laughed. They were being told to sit in the corner and give suggestions while aliens made the real decisions. After saving 3 star systems and thousands of alien lives, humans were being treated like junior partners who couldn't be trusted with responsibility. Captain Harper stood up slowly. Her voice carried across the chamber with military precision. Ambassador Morrison, I need to speak with Admiral Carter immediately. There are urgent matters requiring his attention. Jake nodded. He knew what those urgent matters were. The human fleet was still positioned throughout Council space, protecting alien worlds and maintaining the peace. But if the Council wanted to treat humans like children, then perhaps it was time for the children to go home. The session continued with discussions about trade regulations and territorial disputes. Jake sat through it all, watching aliens debate problems they couldn't solve and make plans they couldn't implement. Without human military protection, half these worlds would fall to raiders within months. Without human manufacturing capacity, their economies would collapse. Without human medical technology, their populations would face plagues they had forgotten how to cure, but they didn't see it that way. They saw humans as a useful tool that had gotten too big for its handle. A weapon that needed to be controlled before it became dangerous to its wielders. The final insult came during the afternoon session. Councillor Zeftai of the Crystal Dominion proposed relocating human colonies from strategic border systems. These worlds require more experienced oversight to ensure proper development and security. Human settlements in these regions should be placed under Council administration for their own protection. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. They weren't just demoting human military officers. They were planning to take human worlds. Colonies that humans had built with their own blood and sweat would be handed over to alien administrators for proper oversight. He activated his emergency communicator and sent a priority message to Earth. President Nancy White needed to know what was happening. The Joint Chiefs needed to understand that the Council was preparing to treat human space as conquered territory. The vote on colony relocation was scheduled for the next day. Jake already knew how it would go. The aliens would vote yes, just like they had voted to demote human commanders. They would smile and talk about wisdom and experience while they carved up human territory like a prize, but they had made one critical mistake. They assumed that humans would accept this treatment, the way they always had before. They assumed that humans would continue to serve and protect and sacrifice for species that saw them as useful barbarians. Jake Morrison had been a diplomat for most of his adult life. He believed in negotiation and compromise and finding peaceful solutions to difficult problems. But as he sat in that chamber, surrounded by aliens who treated human sacrifice as an entitlement, he realized that some problems couldn't be solved with words. Sometimes the only solution was to walk away and let the consequences speak for themselves. He began drafting his final speech to the Council. Tomorrow, when they voted to take human worlds, he would give them something to remember. He would give them the choice they had been asking for all along, the choice to govern the galaxy without human interference. The next morning, Jake Morrison stood before the assembled council with a calm expression that betrayed none of the anger burning in his chest. The vote on human colony relocation had passed exactly as expected. 12 alien species had decided that human worlds needed their guidance and protection. Not a single voice had spoken in defense of human sovereignty. Jake walked to the center podium where Councillor Vexthal had delivered his insults the day before. The chamber fell silent as he activated the communication array that would broadcast his words across the galaxy. Every human ship, station, and colony would hear what he was about to say. The Earth government has reviewed the Council's recent decisions regarding human military commands and territorial administration, Jake began, his voice steady and clear. We find these decisions unacceptable. Therefore, Earth hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The silence that followed was complete. No species had ever voluntarily left the Council. The very idea was unthinkable. Councillor Vexthal rose from his seat, his crystalline form shimmering with agitation. Ambassador Morrison, surely you cannot be serious. The Council is willing to negotiate terms that might be more favorable to human interests. Jake looked at the Zeltharian with cold eyes. The negotiation requires mutual respect. The Council has made it clear that humans are viewed as useful tools rather than equal partners. We decline to continue in that capacity. He turned to address the entire chamber. All human personnel, vessels, and assets will be withdrawn from Council space within 72 hours. Any interference with this withdrawal will be considered an act of war. The aliens erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other in a dozen different languages. Some demanded that Jake reconsider. Others threatened sanctions and military action. A few seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what was happening. Jake walked out of the chamber without another word. Captain Harper was waiting for him in the corridor, along with Dr. Brooks and the rest of the human delegation. They moved quickly toward their shuttle while alien security forces tried to decide if they should intervene. Admiral Carter is already implementing the withdrawal protocol, Harper said as they boarded the shuttle. Every human commander received the authorization codes 10 minutes ago. The shuttle lifted off from the Council world as Jake watched the massive alien city shrink below them. He felt no satisfaction in what he had done, only a grim certainty that it had been necessary. The aliens would learn what they had lost, but the lesson would cost them dearly. Admiral Ryan Carter stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the tactical display that showed human forces throughout Council space. Over 3,000 ships were beginning the largest military evacuation in galactic history. The coordination required was staggering, but humans had always excelled at logistics. "Signal all fleet commanders," Carter ordered. "Operation Exodus is now active. All human vessels are to begin immediate withdrawal to designated rally points. Any alien interference is to be reported but not engaged unless directly fired upon." Captain Lisa Harper arrived on the bridge an hour later with the diplomatic shuttle. She brought news that the Council was in complete chaos. Some species were demanding that humans be forced to stay. Others were beginning to realize what human withdrawal would mean for galactic security. "They don't understand yet," Harper told Carter as they reviewed the evacuation timetables. "They think we're bluffing, or that we'll change our minds." Carter studied the reports coming in from human commanders across the galaxy. The speed of the withdrawal was shocking even to him. Humans had always been ready to leave at a moment's notice, but he hadn't realized how efficiently they could execute such a massive operation. Dr. Helen Brooks was overseeing the scientific evacuation from her research station in the Kepler system. She watched as her team systematically removed every piece of human-developed technology from the joint research facilities. The aliens working alongside them seemed confused by the sudden activity. "Dr. Brooks, surely this is unnecessary," said her Valdari colleague Dr. Yuthenel. "The Council disagreement will be resolved through negotiation." Helen didn't look up from the quantum computer she was disconnecting. "The disagreement has already been resolved. Humans are no longer welcome as equals in this galaxy." She uploaded the final data transfers to her personal drives and initiated the security protocols that would wipe all human research from the station's databases. Decades of medical breakthroughs, technological innovations, and scientific discoveries vanished in minutes. The Valdari scientist watched in growing alarm as Helen's team removed equipment and shut down systems. "You cannot take all of this. Many of these systems are essential for station operations." "Then you should have thought of that before voting to relocate our colonies," Helen replied. She sealed the last storage container and signaled for transport. Within hours, the research station would lose most of its functionality. Commander Beth Allen was managing similar evacuations across 17 different worlds. Human engineers were quietly dismantling fusion reactors, quantum communicators, and defense systems they had built and maintained for years. The aliens had grown so dependent on human expertise that they barely understood how their own infrastructure worked. On the industrial world of Gamma Centauri, Human factory supervisors were shutting down manufacturing plants that produced essential goods for dozens of star systems. The alien workers stood helplessly as production lines went dark and automated systems failed without human oversight. "This will cause severe shortages throughout the sector," warned the local Nexus administrator. "That's no longer our problem," replied the human supervisor as he sealed the final control room. "You wanted independence from human decision-making. Now you have it." The most devastating withdrawals were happening in the medical sector. Professor Kate Sullivan had spent 15 years developing treatments for alien diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. Her research had saved billions of lives and eliminated several interstellar plagues. Now she was systematically destroying every sample, every formula, and every treatment protocol. The aliens watching her work seemed unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. "Professor, you cannot destroy this research," pleaded a Keeper medical officer. "Entire populations depend on these treatments." Kate sealed the last bio-container and activated the sterilization protocols. Perhaps the Council should have considered that before deciding humans needed supervision. The evacuation continued with mechanical precision. Human cargo ships collected personnel and equipment from hundreds of worlds. Military transports moved through alien space like ghosts, taking everything of value and leaving behind empty facilities. General Frank Mitchell coordinated the ground evacuations with the same efficiency he had once brought to military campaigns. His teams moved through Council space like a conquering army in reverse, taking instead of occupying but leaving devastation in their wake. The aliens began to understand what was happening as critical systems failed throughout their territory. Communication networks went down as human-maintained quantum relays shut off. Transportation systems collapsed as human-built engines stopped working. Medical facilities closed as human-developed equipment was removed or sabotaged. By the end of the first day, panic was spreading through the alien populations. The Council emergency session devolved into chaos as representatives blamed each other for the crisis they had created. Councillor Vexthal tried to maintain order, but even his crystalline composure was cracking. The humans cannot simply abandon their responsibilities to galactic civilization. "They can and they are," replied Councillor Yathara, her electronic voice filled with growing dread. "We have made a terrible mistake." The second day brought reports of infrastructure failures across Council space. Power grids were collapsing without human engineers to maintain them. Hospitals were closing without human medical technology. Even basic services like water purification and waste management were failing. On the third day, Admiral Carter's fleet reached the edge of Council space. Every human ship, station, and settlement had been evacuated. Not a single piece of human technology remained functional in alien hands. The final transmission came from Jake Morrison aboard the diplomatic vessel. His message was broadcast to every world in Council space. "You asked us to leave because we were too young and too aggressive for your civilization. We have honored that request. The galaxy is now free to pursue wisdom and experience without human interference. We will remember who stood with us and who cast us out." The great human fleet turned toward the galactic rim, where empty worlds waited to be settled and new civilizations could be built. Behind them, the lights of the great alien cities began to flicker and fade as the systems that had sustained them for millennia finally began to fail. 3 months after humanity's departure, the first reports of alien ships crossing into Council space reached the emergency session. The hegemony had emerged from the outer rim with a fleet that dwarfed anything the Council had ever faced. Their black vessels moved through space like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Councillor Vexthal stood at the center podium, his crystalline form no longer shimmering with arrogance but dimmed with fear. The reports coming in from the border worlds painted a picture of destruction that none of the assembled aliens could fully comprehend. "The hegemony forces have taken the Altair system," he announced to the chamber. 17 billion Valdari. Colonists are missing and presumed dead. Their fleet is moving toward the core worlds. The silence that followed was broken by Councillor Yathara's electronic voice. "How is this possible?" Our early warning systems should have detected them weeks ago. But the early warning systems had been built and maintained by humans. The quantum sensor networks that had protected Council space for decades had failed within days of the human departure. The aliens had tried to repair them, but they lacked the expertise to understand the complex technology humans had developed. Commander Troy Davis monitored the Council communications from his post on the edge of human space. The independent Human Defense Force had established listening stations throughout the rim worlds, watching as their former allies struggled with threats they had once helped contain. The reports made for grim reading. The hegemony had struck with precision and overwhelming force. Their war machines tore through Council defenses like paper, using tactics that the aliens had no experience countering. Without human military advisors, the Council forces were fighting a war they didn't understand against an enemy they couldn't predict. They're coordinating their responses using the old manual systems, Davis reported to Admiral Carter. Communication delays are running 6 to 8 hours between fleet commands. The hegemony is exploiting the gaps to hit isolated formations. Carter nodded grimly as he reviewed the tactical data. The aliens were trying to fight a modern war using ancient protocols. Their commanders had no experience with rapid response tactics or adaptive strategies. They were trained to fight ceremonial battles between equals, not survival wars against a superior enemy. The second wave of disasters came from the medical sector. Dr. Susan Clark received the first desperate transmission from her former colleague, Dr. Yathanol on Kepler Station. The Valdari scientist's electronic voice carried notes of panic that Clark had never heard before. Dr. Clark, we are experiencing a medical emergency of unprecedented scale. The Zyatai plague has returned to 17 systems. Without your treatment protocols, we are losing millions of lives daily. Clark read the transmission twice before responding. The Zyatai plague had been eliminated 15 years ago through human medical intervention. The treatment required precise genetic therapy that only human scientists had mastered. Without the human-developed vaccines and treatment facilities, the disease was spreading unchecked through alien populations. I'm sorry to hear about your situation, Clark replied through the diplomatic channels. However, Earth's medical resources are now focused on human populations in our new territories. Similar pleas were coming in from across the former Council space. Diseases that had been controlled or eliminated were returning with devastating effect. Alien medical facilities lacked the equipment and expertise to treat conditions that human doctors had handled routinely. The economic collapse was even more catastrophic than the military situation. Captain Joe Barnes commanded one of the human trade vessels that now operated exclusively between human worlds. He watched the galactic trade networks implode as supply chains that had operated for millennia suddenly failed. The Nexus Confederacy is offering triple standard rates for manufactured goods, Barnes reported to the Human Trade Commission. Their industrial capacity is down to 20% of pre-withdrawal levels. The aliens had grown completely dependent on human manufacturing. Expertise. When human engineers left, they took with them the knowledge of how to maintain and operate the complex systems that produced everything from basic tools to starship components. Entire worlds faced shortages of essential goods. The Zeltharian crystal cities that had once gleamed with technological achievement were going dark as power systems failed. The crystalline beings had been so focused on philosophical pursuits that they had forgotten how to maintain their own infrastructure. Human engineers had quietly handled those details for decades. Admiral Carter observed the developing crisis from the new human capital world of New Geneva. The planet had been chosen specifically for its strategic position on the galactic rim, far from the chaos now consuming Council space. Human colonies were thriving in their new independence while their former partners faced extinction. The hegemony has taken 43 systems in the past month, reported Captain Harper during the morning briefing. Council forces are falling back toward the core worlds, but they're leaving entire populations defenseless. The abandonment of outer rim colonies was perhaps the most damaging aspect of the alien response to the crisis. Without human tactical doctrine, the Council military had reverted to protecting only their most important worlds. Billions of civilians were being left behind to face the hegemony war machines alone, but the hegemony was not the worst threat emerging from the chaos. Deep space monitoring stations that humans had built and maintained for generations had gone offline. The quantum barriers containing ancient horrors had begun to fail. Things that had been imprisoned since the dawn of galactic civilization were stirring in the dark spaces between stars. The first devourer emerged from the void near the Centauri cluster. Captain Alex Turner, monitoring rim space from his patrol ship, detected the massive dark energy signature as the ancient horror began consuming entire solar systems. The devourers had been contained for millennia by human-built quantum barriers. But those barriers required constant maintenance that only human engineers understood. "Priority transmission to all human forces," Turner broadcasted. "Devourer containment has failed in Sector 7. The entity is consuming inhabited systems at an accelerated rate." The news reached the Council emergency session within hours. The assembled aliens stared at the reports with the growing realization that they faced not just military defeat, but total extinction. The Devourers had been a theoretical threat for so long that most aliens had forgotten they were real. "Counselor," Zeftai of the Crystal Dominion spoke for the first time since the crisis began. His voice carried the weight of a species facing annihilation. The Devourer containment systems were managed entirely by human personnel. We have no records of how they functioned or how to repair them. The admission sent shockwaves through the chamber. For thousands of years, humans had quietly maintained the barriers that kept ancient evils locked away. The aliens had been so focused on excluding humans from decision-making that they had never bothered to learn about the systems that kept them all alive. Dar Brooks, monitoring communications from her new research facility, noted the increasing desperation in alien transmissions. Former colleagues who had once dismissed human capabilities were now begging for assistance with problems they couldn't solve. "The quantum resonance in Sector 12 is destabilizing," came one urgent message. "We need immediate human technical support to prevent cascade failure." But human technical support was no longer available to alien worlds. The expertise that had quietly held galactic civilization together for generations was now focused on building a new human empire among the rim stars. The breaking point came when the proud Zeltharians sent a coded transmission directly to Admiral Carter. Counselor Vexthal, the same being who had insulted humanity months earlier, appeared on the communication screen looking diminished and desperate. "Admiral Carter, the Zeltharian hegemony formally requests emergency assistance from human forces. We are prepared to offer significant concessions in exchange for military support against the current threats." Carter studied the alien's crystalline features for a long moment before responding. "The Human Federation is no longer involved in Council affairs. We suggest you contact your allies for assistance." He cut the transmission without waiting for a reply. Around him, the bridge crew continued their work with quiet efficiency. They were building something new among the stars while their former partners faced the consequences of their arrogance. The galaxy that had once dismissed humanity as too young and aggressive was now begging for the protection of those same qualities. But humanity was no longer listening to alien voices. They had their own destiny to forge, and it lay among the empty worlds of the galactic rim where no council had ever held sway. The lesson was being written in the extinction of entire civilizations, but the teachers were no longer present to explain it. 6 months after humanity's departure, the galaxy was dying. President Nancy White sat in her office on New Geneva, reading the latest intelligence reports from the former council space. The numbers were staggering in their horror. Over 200 billion alien lives had been lost to war, disease, and starvation. Entire species were facing extinction. The hegemony war machine had consumed half of the former council territory. Their black ships moved through space like death incarnate, turning proud alien homeworlds into smoking ruins. The council military had collapsed completely after losing 90% of their fleet in a series of disastrous engagements. The Vildari Collective has lost their homeworld, reported General Patricia Ross during the morning briefing. Intelligence suggests that survivors are fleeing toward human space as refugees. White reviewed the casualty reports with growing unease. She had expected the aliens to struggle without human support, but she had not anticipated the complete breakdown of galactic civilization. The species that had once dismissed humanity as too young and aggressive were now facing genocide at the hands of enemies they couldn't defeat. Commander Rachel White processed the first wave of alien refugees. At the border station near human space, thousands of Valdari, Zeltharians, and other species were arriving daily in damaged ships, begging for sanctuary from the advancing hegemony forces. "Please," transmitted a Valdari captain whose ship was leaking atmosphere. "We have children aboard. Our colony ships are full of civilians fleeing the war zones." Rachel looked at the tactical display showing hundreds of alien vessels waiting at the border. They were the survivors of worlds that had stood for millennia. Now, reduced to begging for shelter from the species they had once scorned, "You are authorized to enter human space for humanitarian purposes," Rachel finally responded. "Report to Processing Station Alpha for assignment to refugee camps." The sight of alien children crying in the refugee centers was almost unbearable. These beings had grown up in civilizations that considered themselves superior to humanity. Now they huddled in human-built shelters, dependent on human charity for their very survival. Dr. Amanda Rivera faced an even more devastating situation in the medical crisis, consuming alien worlds. The latest reports indicated that 17 different plagues were spreading unchecked through former council space. Diseases that human medicine had eliminated were returning with catastrophic effect. The Nexus Confederacy is reporting 12 million deaths per day from the Korathi fever, Rivera read from her medical intelligence briefing. Their medical facilities lack the genetic sequencing equipment to develop treatments. The alien medical requests were becoming increasingly desperate. Former colleagues who had once worked alongside human doctors were now pleading for basic supplies and expertise. Entire hospital systems were collapsing as alien physicians tried to treat conditions they had no experience handling. "Dr. Rivera, we are prepared to offer unrestricted access to our research databases in exchange for medical assistance," came one transmission from a Keeper medical facility. "Our population is facing extinction without human intervention." Rivera read the message 3 times before deleting it. The same aliens who had voted to restrict human access to their technology were now offering everything they had in exchange for help. But human medical resources were fully committed to treating the refugee populations flooding into human space. The economic situation was equally catastrophic. Captain Steve Mason commanded a human cargo vessel that now operated exclusively in human territory. He monitored the collapse of galactic trade networks that had operated for thousands of years. The Crystal Dominion is offering their entire strategic mineral reserves for a single shipment of manufactured goods, Mason reported to the Human Trade Authority. Their industrial capacity has dropped to less than 5% of pre-withdrawal levels. The aliens had built their civilizations on the assumption that human engineering and manufacturing would always be available. When humans left, they took with them not just their expertise but the fundamental knowledge of how modern technology worked. Entire star systems were going dark as power generation systems failed. Alien engineers tried desperately to maintain equipment they didn't understand, but without human technical manuals and spare parts, even basic infrastructure was breaking down. Captain Eric Stone monitored hegemony fleet movements from his intelligence ship positioned in neutral space. The enemy forces were advancing with unstoppable momentum, crushing alien resistance wherever they encountered it. The latest tactical analysis painted a picture of complete military collapse. The hegemony has developed new siege weapons specifically designed to crack crystalline structures, Stone reported. They're targeting Zeltharian cities with particular efficiency. The enemy seemed to understand alien weaknesses better than the aliens understood themselves. Hegemony strategists had studied Council military doctrine for decades, waiting for the moment when human protection would be withdrawn. They had timed their invasion perfectly, but the hegemony was not the only threat consuming alien civilization. The Devourer outbreak had spread to 12 star systems, turning living worlds into barren husks. The ancient horrors moved through space like cosmic cancer, consuming everything in their path with insatiable hunger. Captain Alex Turner tracked the expanding zone of destruction from his monitoring station. The quantum barriers that had contained these entities for millennia were failing one by one as the maintenance systems shut down. 3 more containment fields collapsed in the past week, Turner transmitted to Fleet Command. The Devourers are accelerating their consumption rate as they encounter inhabited systems. The aliens had no defense against threats that existed beyond physical reality. The Devourers operated according to rules that only human quantum physicists had begun to understand. Without human-built containment systems, these entities would eventually consume the entire galaxy. The breaking point came when the Council formally dissolved itself. The remaining alien leaders could no longer maintain the pretense of unified government when their civilizations were collapsing around them. Each species was now focused entirely on its own survival. Ambassador Jake Morrison, recalled from retirement to handle the crisis, received the formal notification from his office on New Geneva. The message was signed by every surviving alien leader in former Council space. The Galactic Council hereby dissolves all governmental functions and transfers authority to individual species representatives. Emergency diplomatic missions are being established to negotiate directly with the Human Federation for assistance in the current crisis. Morrison read the document with mixed emotions. The same council that had dismissed human contributions months earlier was now abandoning its responsibilities and begging for human intervention. The irony was complete but provided no satisfaction. The alien diplomatic missions began arriving. Within days, ships carrying the most senior leaders of each species made the journey to human space, their proud bearings replaced by desperation. The Zeltharian crystals were dimmed with defeat. The Valdari electronic voices carried tones of absolute surrender. Counselor Vexthal arrived aboard a damaged vessel with half his government in refugee status. The being who had once dismissed human wisdom now waited in the diplomatic reception area like a supplicant seeking audience with a king. Ambassador Morrison, Vexthal said when they finally met, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. The Zeltharian people face extinction without immediate human assistance. We are prepared to accept any terms you might offer. Similar scenes played out across the human capital as alien leaders who had once looked down on humanity now begged for salvation. The Keeper philosophers abandoned their ancient pride. The Crystal Dominion offered their sacred homeworlds as human colonies. The Nexus Confederacy dissolved their government and requested direct human administration. President White convened emergency sessions of the Human High Council to determine how to respond to the crisis. The debates were intense and emotional, as human leaders struggled with the decision to save or abandon the species that had rejected them. They treated us like children, argued Senator Mike Brown during one heated session. They voted to take our worlds and reduce us to servants. Why should we risk human lives to save beings who saw us as inferior? Because we are not them, replied Senator Lisa Green. We do not abandon populations facing genocide, regardless of how they treated us in the past. The arguments continued for days as alien refugees flooded human space and the death toll in former Council territory climbed toward 1 trillion lives. The galaxy that had once dismissed humanity as too young and aggressive was now completely dependent on human mercy for its survival. The choice facing humanity was simple but terrible. They could save their former oppressors and risk everything they had built, or they could watch entire civilizations burn while they built their new empire among the stars. Either way, the universe would never again question whether humanity deserved a place at the table of galactic power. President Nancy White stood before the assembled Human High Council as the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Through the massive windows of the council chamber, she could see the lights of New Geneva spreading across the horizon like stars brought down to Earth. Humanity had built something beautiful in their exile, but now the universe, Was asking them to risk it all for species that had cast them out. The debate had raged for 3 days. Every human leader had voiced their opinion on whether to intervene in the galactic crisis. Some argued for complete isolation, letting the aliens face the consequences of their arrogance. Others insisted that mercy was what separated humanity from the monsters now consuming civilizations. Admiral Ryan Carter presented the military assessment with his usual precision. His weathered face showed the strain of watching entire species face extinction while humanity possessed the power to stop it. "We can defeat the hegemony," Carter stated flatly. "Our tactical simulations show a 94% probability of success if we deploy the full fleet. The enemy is overextended and vulnerable to our strike doctrine." The Admiral activated the holographic display showing hegemony positions throughout former Council space. Their black ships controlled vast territories, but they had made the same mistake as the aliens before them. They underestimated human military capabilities. "However," Carter continued, "any intervention must be conducted under absolute human authority. No committee oversight, no alien input on strategy, no restrictions on operational methods. Complete military autonomy or we don't engage." Dr. Amanda Rivera outlined the medical situation with clinical detachment. The plague outbreaks consuming alien worlds could be stopped, but only through radical intervention that would require unprecedented access to alien populations. "We can save them," Rivera said simply. "Human medical technology can cure the diseases and repair the genetic damage. But we would need total authority over all medical operations. No alien bureaucracy, no cultural restrictions, no interference from local officials." General Patricia Ross detailed the infrastructure collapse that was crippling alien civilizations. Power grids, communication networks, transportation systems, manufacturing facilities, everything was failing without human expertise to maintain it. "Rebuilding will take decades," Ross explained. "We would need to essentially reconstruct their entire technological base from the ground up. It requires complete control over all engineering projects and unlimited access to alien worlds." The price of salvation was becoming clear. Humanity could save the galaxy, but only if the aliens surrendered all authority to human leadership. The species that had once dismissed humans as too young for responsibility would have to submit completely to human governance. The most heated debate came from Senator Mike Brown, who represented the isolationist faction. His voice carried the anger of every human who had been insulted and dismissed by alien arrogance. "They called us children," Brown said, his words echoing through the chamber. "They voted to take our worlds and reduce us to advisory roles. Now, they want us to bleed for them again. Why should we save beings who saw us as inferior?" Senator Lisa Green responded with equal passion. She represented the humanitarian faction that believed mercy was humanity's greatest strength. "Because we are not them," Green replied. "We do not abandon populations facing genocide. We do not let children die because their parents made mistakes. This is what makes us better than the species that rejected us." The debate might have continued indefinitely, but Captain Steve Mason provided the decisive argument. He had served on the front lines during the Void War, watching human soldiers die to save alien worlds that barely acknowledged their sacrifice. "We are not them," Mason said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen the cost of alien arrogance. "We do not abandon allies, even former ones who treated us poorly, but this time we do it on our terms." The vote was close but decisive. Humanity would intervene in the galactic crisis, but only under conditions that ensured such treatment could never happen again. The aliens would be saved, but they would live as junior partners in a human-led galaxy. The terms were drafted with brutal efficiency. Any species requesting human assistance would surrender all governmental authority to human administrators. Human commanders would have absolute control over military operations with no alien oversight. Human scientists would have unrestricted access to alien populations for medical intervention. Human engineers would govern all reconstruction efforts. Without interference. Ambassador Jake Morrison was recalled from retirement to deliver the terms to the desperate alien leaders waiting in human space. He entered the diplomatic center where beings who had once looked down on humanity now waited like supplicants seeking mercy from a king. Counselor Vexthal was first to receive the document. The proud Zeltharian's crystalline form had lost all its former luster as he read the terms of his species' survival. His people would live, but under human authority for the foreseeable future. These terms are... Vexthal began, then stopped. His homeworld was in ruins, his people were dying, and the hegemony was advancing toward his remaining colonies. Pride was a luxury his species could no longer afford. These terms are acceptable, he finished, his voice barely above a whisper. He placed his crystalline appendage on the signature pad, formally surrendering Zeltharian sovereignty to human leadership. One by one, the alien leaders signed the accords. The Valdari Collective dissolved their government and requested direct human administration. The Crystal Dominion offered their sacred homeworlds as human colonies. The Nexus Confederacy signed away their independence in exchange for protection from the advancing hegemony. Each signature represented the end of an ancient civilization's independence and the beginning of human dominance over galactic affairs. The species that had once formed the Council were now subjects of a human empire they had tried to exclude from power. Within hours of the final signature, human fleets were deploying across the galaxy. Admiral Carter's forces moved with the precision that had once saved alien worlds during the Void War, but this time, they moved as conquerors rather than allies. The hegemony learned too late that they had made a critical error. Their intelligence had told them that humans were no longer protecting Council space. They had not considered that humans might return as rulers rather than servants. Carter's fleet struck with devastating efficiency. Human ships appeared throughout hegemony-controlled space simultaneously, using tactics that the enemy had never encountered. Within 72 hours, the invasion force that had seemed unstoppable was reduced to scattered remnants fleeing toward dark space. Dr. Rivera's medical teams deployed to plague-stricken worlds with authority that no alien government could challenge. Human treatment stopped the outbreaks within weeks, saving billions of lives that would have been lost to diseases the aliens could no longer cure. General Ross's engineering corps began the massive task of rebuilding galactic infrastructure. Under human specifications, the new systems would be more efficient and more secure, but they would also be completely dependent on human expertise for maintenance and operation. The ancient threats that had emerged from failing containment systems were neutralized with human technology that the aliens had never fully understood. The Devourers were forced back into quantum prisons stronger than anything that had held them. Before President White's final address to the former Council species was broadcast to every surviving world, her words would be remembered for generations as the moment when humanity's mercy came with a price that changed the galaxy forever. You asked us to leave because we were too young, too aggressive, too different, White said, her voice carrying across billions of light years. Now you beg us to return because those same qualities are what can save you. We accept this responsibility, but we will never again serve as your subordinates. She paused, looking directly into the camera that would carry her words to alien leaders who had once dismissed human wisdom. Remember this lesson when you teach your children about this day. Never mistake mercy for weakness, and never forget who stands watch while you sleep safely. The galaxy belongs to those strong enough to protect it, wise enough to govern it, and merciful enough to save those who cannot save themselves. The transmission ended, but its message would echo through history. The day mankind left the Council was indeed the day the universe learned to beg for mercy. And humanity, in their infinite compassion and terrible efficiency, had answered that plea on their own terms. The galaxy was safe, but it would never again question who truly deserved to lead among the stars.